Hello and welcome everyone. It's now 1 o'clock and I can see that people are still coming in. So I'll just wait a couple of minutes to make sure that we have everyone on board before we start this webinar. So hello and welcome everyone to this IAAP Nordic webinar featuring Sarah Broadwell from Norway and also from the US, I think originally. So at least the Norwegian touch of her English is not that present. So before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. We are in these free of charge webinars. We are using automatic captions. So please use the CC function in Zoom. We are doing this webinar in English because we have participants from, well, we have a speaker who is fluent in English, but we also have participants from Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark. So welcome all of you. It's really nice to see that we kind of cover all our 4 countries also in the participants lists. And I know we have members and non-members also in the audience today. So that's really, really nice to know. If you would like to ask questions to Sarah or to us at IAAP after the presentation, then please use the Q&A function. And as this is a webinar, your camera and microphone has been disabled. And if you prefer to speak when you pose your question, then you can use the raise hand function. And my colleague Tiba will manage the chat for any technical issues. And I will just kick off and end this. So my name is Susanna Lorin. I am the manager of IAAP Nordic and also the representative for IAAP to the EU. And I also have a couple of other hats. So I'm also the research and innovation officer at Funka, and I lead the joint working group for e-accessibility on the European standards for accessibility and so on and so forth. I've been in this industry for so long that I have a long title. I'm very excited today to introduce to you a good friend, a fantastic colleague, and an inspiring speaker, Sarah Broadwell, from the Norwegian Labour and Welfare Administration. That's really a long word. We call it NAV. And it's one of the biggest, I think, agencies in the whole of the Nordic countries. It's huge. So how can you ever make that accessible and make everyone go in the right direction? I believe we will learn a lot about design and kind of design principles, but also processes and how to internally make people do the right thing. I've heard Sarah talk very inspiring and engaging about that before, so I hope to get the same kind of menu again. But before I leave the floor to Sarah, I just wanted to make a brief announcement because my colleague Eva, who you've met before, she's now on parental leave. And in her place, we have a very nice person called Alberto. So Alberto Highlander, who is originally from Spain, but living in Sweden. So starting to learn all the Nordic languages, I hope. And he will be the project coordinator for IAAP Nordic, at least for the upcoming 18 months. And then they will have to fight about who is taking over. But Alberto, do you want to say something about yourself and your role?
Right. Thank you so much, Susanna. Yeah, half Spanish, some Swedish roots. My last name, says it. I have some Swedish roots. Yeah, I'm taking the lead, after Eva's participation in the Nordic chapter. I'm very excited to be here. I'm the project coordinator. I will be helping all the members on any questions regarding memberships, certifications, education, or anything related to this Nordic chapter. Our wish is to expand and get new members on board and make the Nordic chapter, which is actually taking the lead in many cases within the organization, but to strengthen and make it more. Yeah, I'm taking the lead basically in the organization. So yeah, for all your questions regarding IAP, and anything related to the chapter, I'm here for you. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now I will stop sharing my screen and leave the floor to Sarah to tell us about how to scale up accessibility and make it in an easy way. So that sounds really good, that it's not only doable, but it's also easy to do right. So that's a really good good heading for, I think, for this presentation. So Sarah is not only the senior advisor and design, I don't know, design accessibility queen or something like that. I don't know the precise title at NOV, but she's also part of our advisory council. So she's very engaged in everything we do in IWP as well. So please, Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Susanna. Yes, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar about how we at the Norwegian Labour and Welfare Administration, how we work with accessibility. More specifically, I want to tell you about Aksel, which is our product development toolbox. Aksel has the goal of making sure that our 80+ cross-disciplinary and autonomous product teams have everything they need to be able to create consistent and accessible services for all the people who need them. I will also, if I have time, talk a little bit more about some of the other ways in which we work at NOV to scale accessibility internally in our organization. My name is Sarah Broadwell, and I work as an accessibility specialist, both on Team Aksel, which is our design system team, and on the accessibility team at NOV. I am a certified professional in web accessibility. I've been working with the web for over 25 years, I think. Both as a front-end dev and as a UX specialist. So, the Norwegian Labour and Welfare Administration, or NOV as we're better known, it's an absolutely massive organization. This image of our directorate's offices here is really just the tip of the iceberg. NOV's mission is to support people living in Norway from cradle to grave, we like to say, and to do this, we administer really around 1/3 of Norway's state budget. This is through programs like parental leave, sick leave, disability benefits, assistive technology support, pensions. The list really goes on and on. So these services that NOV provides, they're for all of Norway's residents and more. It's people in different life situations, people who speak various languages, people with differing access to and differing levels of familiarity with technology, and of course, people with different abilities and disabilities. And the thing is, everybody who has a right to our services needs to be able to use our IT systems. We also have something like 20,000 employees. So in addition to the IT services that we make for the people of Norway, we also make most of the internal systems that these 20,000 employees use to dole out this 1/3 of the country's yearly budget. So we've got a lot going on. Our IT department has over 800 employees, and based on the statistics and our team catalog, we have over 180 teams. Around 80 of these are what we call these cross-disciplinary autonomous product teams. So NOV's, the way NOV is organized, it's inspired by this model Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pais lay out in their book that's called Team Topologies. This is pretty much required reading for our employees. The whole concept of team topologies is all about minimizing cognitive load, which is to say the total amount of mental effort people use in our working memory. The whole idea here is that when software is too big for people to hold in our heads, it's really bad for agility. It's really hard for the organization to get things done. So team topologies, it proposes 4 different types of teams that work together to enable speed and flow, or fart og flyt, as we like to say. The first kind of team is what's called stream aligned. Stream in this case referring to a value stream. So this kind of team has the responsibility for one particular product or service, like assistive technology support applications, or maybe for disability pay. When I talk about these 80+ autonomous cross-disciplinary product teams, this is the kind of team that I'm talking about. You also have what's called enabling teams. And these are teams of specialists in some specific domain, like accessibility, for example. Enabling teams, they basically spend time figuring stuff out and sharing the knowledge with the stream-aligned teams so that those product teams can focus on making the product. Our accessibility team, we help our product teams in this way by, for example, doing bug hunts, maybe some screen reader testing, or helping a team figure out how their choices affect people using a particular kind of technology, maybe for recruiting people for user testing, that sort of thing. Complicated subsystem teams are not so relevant for this talk, but the point with them is they support the stream-aligned teams by providing some sort of very specialized knowledge about a complicated subject like AI or algorithms. And then you have platform teams. Platform teams have responsibility for some kind of internal product that supports the stream-aligned teams in, again, achieving speed and flow. So Team Aksel, the design system team, is a platform team. And our goal is to provide a design system and documentation about good practices so that the product teams can create the consistent and accessible services that we want to provide for all of our users. So I always get asked why are we called Team Aksel? And Aksel, of course, it's part of a machine that supports another loaded rotating machine part, or it can be a part that works to transfer power from one part of the machine to another. So our Aksel has the task of supporting these 80-odd frantically burdened interdisciplinary product teams in creating our consistent solutions. So our goal with Team Aksel is to make it easy for the teams to do right, or lett å gjøre rett, as we say in Norwegian. So of course, all of our public-facing systems, we're legally required to fulfill the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2.1. And we have the goal that our internal systems, the systems used by our employees, they should also fulfill WCAG. We also ideally want to meet as many AAA requirements as we can, at least as possible and as reasonable. And of course, consistency is one of the success criteria in WCAG, meaning functionality that is the same across the system needs to have a consistent user experience. So every single team's search button should use the same icon, it should have the same accessible name. And when it comes to conformance, in WCAG, it's only about whole pages and complete processes. So if there's a component on one page of an application flow that breaks a success criterion, that means the whole flow using that component is going to be non-compliant. And if there's an accessibility issue in a reusable component, every single page that uses that component is not going to be in conformance with the legal requirements. So given that we have these autonomous teams, each one of whom really has the sole responsibility for ensuring that their product or service complies with the law, how can it be possible for NOV to have any hope whatsoever of delivering these consistent and accessible solutions, let alone provide a good UX for everyone? And the answer, of course, is a design system. So in 2015, our accessibility team did an analysis of some of the services on nov.no. And out of all the accessibility bugs that they found, it turned out that fully 74% of these would not have occurred if the team responsible for the service had been using the design system. So we know for a fact that design systems work for improving the accessibility of our solutions. So a design system, then, it's a very important part of what Aksel provides for our teams. What exactly, then, is a design system? When we talk about a design system, what we mean is it's basically a common language that makes it easier for the product teams to communicate both with each other and with our end users. So rather than making it so that the teams each have to sift through a messy pile of design patterns and elements and colors and fonts and technologies and try and cobble all these things together into something that works more or less like what the other team seems to be making. When we have a design system, what we're doing is we're offering pre-selected components that have been quality assured, organized in a sensible way. And we also offer instructions that the teams need to be able to assemble these parts into a coherent whole. To be a little bit more concrete, Aksel offers basically what's a collection of design decisions. So decisions about which fonts and colors to use, components like input fields and buttons. We offer composite patterns like tables and search fields, and also some page templates. For designers, we offer this in the form of a Figma library, and devs get a library of React components that's available via GitHub. And of course, no set of parts would be complete without some guidance about what you can do with them. And of course, what you shouldn't do with them. So we also offer advice on principles and guidelines, good practice documentation. We offer user research, much of which comes from the teams themselves, because really that's a big part of the point with Aksel here. We don't want to just be producing things and handing them down as if from on high. This is supposed to be more something that we curate. The teams themselves contribute to what we do. So how does Team Aksel work to make this happen? I'm not going to go through this whole thing in detail, and the point is not that you're supposed to be reading this here. But I want to point out the parts of the process that are especially important for ensuring accessibility. When we start out working with a new component or a new pattern, we start by talking with the teams to find out what already exists and how any components that do already exist, how are they being used? Is there anything about the current solutions that the teams are unhappy with? Has anything been user tested? What do those results look like? Has our contact center gotten any feedback about compatibility? When I say we here, I'm talking about the entire team. I'm not just talking about me and my closest colleague, Karianna, who also works with accessibility on the team. Our entire team works together to make sure that things are going to be accessible. So if there is a component that already exists, we do thorough accessibility testing on it to see what the status is. And we ask the teams to send us examples of how they use the components. We collect them in what we call a UI inventory. This is basically just a fancy list in Microsoft Teams. When we do this, we get a much better idea of how the teams use different components, and it helps us refine a model of what it is we're going to build. It helps us understand what we need to account for. And it also lets us know what sort of information we need to include in the documentation. We then design and code a proposed solution. So sometimes Karianna and we participate directly in the design or coding processes. We might do pair designing or even mob designing in Figma together with others on our team. Sometimes we'll make test code that we run past our native screen reader users or maybe other coding experts. And sometimes we basically just offer advice based on what we know from experience might be the potential pitfalls related to specific types of content or components. We generally also want to start working on the documentation at this point in time, but unfortunately, nobody on our team is a particularly huge fan of writing documentation. So often this gets left to later stages. But regardless, a really important thing here is we always try to be available to the others on the design system team if they have questions. So this can be via Slack, but Karianna and I also have what's called office hours, where we set aside an hour, 3 days per week, where we sit on Zoom and anybody on the team can stop by and have a chat. So it can be about clarifications with ongoing design processes, but it also can be more informal things, like maybe an article somebody found. The people on my team are really, they care a lot about what they work with. So they're always coming with things like podcasts or articles about design systems or accessibility that they'd like to discuss. And some people come to the office hours really just to be social or just to hear what it is that we're working on. So once we have a hypothesis about what we want to design, then comes review and iteration. We have a lot of people on the design system team. I think right now we're like 13 people or something. So there's always a lot of work going on. And Karianna and I, we cannot always manage to catch everything that's happening while it's happening. So during the formal review process, we get a look at the proposed solution. We can ask questions and raise concerns, and we can hear a little bit about the thoughts behind why the designers or the developers made the choices that they made. And here, iteration is a key feature of this whole process. It is extremely important that we have time to explore the problem space, improve the components during this design process, test things out, learn from the tests, and discuss things with others, both inside and outside the team. And again, we should be updating the documentation here. The teams, we know that they find it very helpful if we write a bit about why we chose to solve the problem the way we did, as opposed to just delivering a solution. So a little bit about how we test. Karianna and I, we have slightly different approaches and strengths when it comes to the actual testing part. So of course we can both test up against WCAG. Karianna used to work in the governmental organization that's responsible for auditing websites for accessibility. And she actually helped to develop some of their test methodologies. So she has a lot of insight into how they work. And when I studied for the WAS certification, I really solidified my understanding of the details of the success criteria. But I'd say that Karianna is especially good at taking the user's perspective. So I tend to be more technical, but she's much better about focusing on the actual user experience. And she often uses a little sketch like this, just a really basic stick figure to discuss possible issues with others so that no part of the human experience is left out. So she'll ask questions like, what will it be like for people who have reduced vision? People who experience muscular fatigue? What about switch interaction or eye tracking? Another thing that Karianna is particularly good at is networking. And she's really good about leveraging Nov's breadth and size for all of its worth. So we have, for example, brought in people from the Assistive Technology Office to help us figure out, like, for example, how elements using the CSS pseudo-selector focus visible, how is that going to work with eye tracking controls? It's really helpful to have people who are directly there with the users and also have an idea about technology so they can help us understand how our solutions will work out in real life. And again, I tend to focus more on the code. So to start with, one thing, once things start being coded, we have an automated test plugin in Storybook that uncovers like just really basic issues, but it's only a first step. Our devs, they set up a test page with the particular component that we're working on in all of its different variants. And first I test that with an automated tool like Arc Toolkit. If you use these tools, you know that they tend to have a lot of false positives or warnings that aren't necessarily relevant. Like in this example here, you wouldn't normally use autocomplete on a search field. So the warning from the tool isn't really relevant in this situation. But I also spend time actually just looking at the code to see how it's built, to see if it follows best practices. Is there any unnecessary ARIA? There's almost always unnecessary ARIA. Maybe there's something I know from experience would be bad for the user experience for screen reader users. And after that, working with the devs to fix problems as we find them, I'll run a basic test with a screen reader to see if I discover any obvious issues. And if we're talking about a more complicated component, the sort of thing where I know there might be issues with assistive technology, like if it's a date picker or a table, I always get testing help from someone who uses a screen reader on a daily basis. So after we iterate and we fix any issues we might find, then it's time to really wrap up the documentation, because these components and patterns, they are not complete in and of themselves. They are not the final product. The whole purpose here is that they should be integrated into our services. And as I mentioned before, it's whole pages and processes that are relevant where conformance is concerned. So we work together to wrap up the documentation on how the component should and should not be used. Any particular pitfalls we're aware of, or adjustments that need to be made based on context. Do's and don'ts. We document keyboard navigation patterns, expected behavior with screen readers and other assistive technology, and any other particular issues that the teams need to know about when they use our components. So previous iterations of the design system, I think this is actually the third design system Nova's had. Previous iterations have very often sort of relegated accessibility to a separate tab or a separate section. And I'm really not a fan of that approach. I don't like that it communicates to our teams that accessibility is like a separate subject that can be ignored unless you're particularly interested in it. And we need the teams to see this accessibility information as an integrated part of their work. So what we've chosen to do is integrate accessibility information where it's most relevant. So like with the search component here, we explained the use of ARIA roles and accessible names under the code guidelines. They don't exist in some separate accessibility tab. Okay, so let's look at an example of this whole process in action. I think the way we worked with the table component illustrates really well how we work. So we started by doing a ton of research to find out how different teams use tables in our solutions. This is both the public-facing website and our internal systems. The screenshot here shows really a fraction of the examples that we analyzed. Karianna was very closely involved in the design process. And she, of course, knows a lot about tables and screen readers, but since she is a person who has sight, she's not going to have the same perspective as a native screen reader user. So we worked really closely with our colleague, Morten Tollefsen. He's both a native screen reader user and one of the foremost experts on accessibility in Norway. So Morten, he knows not only the technical aspects of web development, but also how actual screen reader users experience and how they want to interact with tables. He can say a lot about what it is that makes for a good user experience versus what's just annoying. There's a quote that Karianna said, something she said to me once that I think really gets to the core of the issue here. She said, those of us who work with design and development must remember why we do it. UX isn't just for people who can see. It should also be reflected in the code and assistive technology. Interdisciplinary discussions from the start are alpha and omega. So of course, it turned out that we needed an expanding row in the table, which I knew from beforehand could be quite a challenge. I coded up a proof of concept and I worked closely together with Morten to test with different screen reader combinations. The front-end dev I was working with, he helped me understand how the teams would use the component, what they would need to know to implement the table properly. We made some adjustments, both to the code and the documentation, just to make sure the teams would be able to integrate the table in a good way. And of course, then there's documentation again. You can write tomes on accessibility in tables, but it's really important here that we actually get things out to the teams so that they can use them and so that we can get feedback from them and iterate on it. And again, here's where it's a little bit tricky with documentation. It hangs behind sometimes, but the whole point here is to get things out. So We continue to work on the documentation, very much learning from the teams what they need to know in order to implement the components properly. And again, iteration is absolutely key. We need to be able to change, we need to be able to learn, we need to be able to improve components. We also need to adapt and adjust the advice that we give people. A really good example here is our work with disabled states. This one is about changing a design principle. So the background for this is that I was pretty new to the team. I started working at NOV in October of last year. When I saw what we were offering for disabled states, I wasn't satisfied with the design, but the team had previously had what we called a process, which is to say a decision-making process about what sort of approach our team has towards a topic. I suggested we bring this up again, because the thing with disabled states, WCAG can be a little bit difficult to interpret precisely what it means about contrast requirements for disabled states. Generally, people do not see disabled states as having to fulfill the contrast requirements. I have, however, given the advice mostly that if you want people to be able to understand a page, if you're going to be showing contents to one person, you need to show it to everybody. So if somebody needs to be able to perceive a disabled state in order to understand the page, everybody should be able to perceive it. Also, NOV, we really want to be ahead of the curve when it comes to accessibility. We want to provide a good user experience for everybody. We do not want to just only meet the requirements. So my goal here is that if anybody can perceive information on our pages, then absolutely everybody should be able to perceive that information. So I think that the disabled states should meet contrast requirements. Well, they didn't. So we brought the topic up again. We looked at how other organizations had solved the problem. We also talked a lot to the teams to find out how they were using disabled states and their systems. We did a bunch of research. I wrote an article about how to avoid having to use disabled states in the first place, because really, even though it might be the case that people do use them sometimes, we really would prefer that our teams avoid using disabled states. At the same time, really, we want to take a kind of a harm reduction approach to this matter. So we did see that a lot of the solutions we had were using these disabled states. So what we're doing now is we're exploring how can we design a disabled state that will be perceived by everybody, but is obviously still disabled. This is not easy. We thought we had a solution, and then when we started coding it, it turned out we weren't able to make that work. So we're not done yet. But as soon as we figure out a solution, you'll be able to see it in Aksel, and you'll be able to see it on nov.no. Again, the thing is, everyone who is entitled to NOV services needs to be able to use them. So we think that everybody should have access to all the information on the site. So based on my experiences in the year I've been working at NOV, and also on the previous design systems I've been involved with, I can suggest some important success factors when it comes to accessibility. The list here, it's most definitely not exhaustive, but I can say that the most important factor by far is buy-in from management. And this is at all levels up the chain. The people who make the decisions, they have to be on board. And at NOV, they most definitely are. For one thing, accessibility it's actually one of our IT ambitions for the next few years. So in English, the quote is kind of, we will build recognizable services that inclusive, consistent services that enable mastery. In Norwegian, it sounds a lot better. In Norwegian, it's vi skal bygge gjenkjennelige tjenester som inkluderer og gir mestring. The point is, this is our IT ambition number one, building inclusive services. And it's not just words, it is truly also action. I remember how impressed I was when Torstein Skara, who is our department director, he took part in the accessibility team's gathering that we had shortly after I started. And this was like a 2-day gathering, and he participated in this. I was very impressed. I also have some pretty cool quotes from some of our higher managers. So this one here is from Jonas, who was our previous IT director. And this quote is actually why I wanted to start working at NAV. He said, "We cannot look upon universal design as merely a compliance requirement. Universal design is a core value, it's part of our mission, and it's what our vision, we give people opportunities, is about." Then there's this from our design director, Fredrik Scheide. He said, "Instead of asking ourselves the question, are we inclusive enough? I think we should start to turn around a little and then make ourselves aware of, are we excluding someone by doing it the way we're doing things now?" So it's one thing that inclusion, it's part of our IT ambitions, but it really means something. You know, it means something when the leaders talk about it, when our management talks about it loudly in public fora, and they dedicate so much of their own time to actually work on it. And then it's the way that the team is put together. Who's on the team? What do they know? How do they work together? Our product owner, Magnus Hellevik, he has done a fabulous job of putting together a really talented team. And I feel really privileged to be able to work with these people. They all know a lot about accessibility. And while it may not be the case that we always agree about everything, we are able to have really good discussions where we can challenge each other and explore all the possible nooks and crannies of the issue. And our solutions definitely end up being better for it. And this really leads me to the next point. We have to have time. We have to have time, those of us who work in a design system, to research and to explore. I remember once, it wasn't too long ago, where I was really stressed out. I felt like I didn't have, I just didn't have the time, I didn't have the capacity to work thoroughly enough with one of our components. And I was freaking out a little bit because I didn't want to be a bottleneck. One of our designers, though, he reminded me that we decide the pace ourselves, that it's really important that we give things the time that they need. And this is one of the advantages of being a platform team in this team topologies form of organization. We really get shielded from a lot of the time pressure that a product team can experience. Our job working on the design system is to produce components and content that's quality assured for accessibility. That's the whole point of what we're supposed to do. Things are supposed to be properly accessible. And if it takes time to get it right, then we use the time. It's not going to help the teams at all if we're just creating a bunch of components that are not properly tested and don't support the legal requirements. The problem really, it can be very difficult when you're working with accessibility in an organization that values accessibility, because everybody wants a piece of your time. This is a slightly censored picture of my calendar for a week not too long ago. And I think Karianne's calendar is even worse than mine. There's just a lot of demand for accessibility at NAV. And again, the people on Team Aksel, they're creating a lot. So we sometimes feel like things are going a little bit faster than what we can keep up with. And finding time to keep up to date on things is not always easy. Then there's the point again about iteration. This is certainly related to the time factor. How do you find this balance between producing all the components that the teams need versus the need to do thorough quality assurance? How do we manage to improve the components without creating problems for the teams that are already using them? We're working to figure this out. We don't have all the answers here, but I do think it's related to the final points about frequent, regular communication and collaboration, especially with the teams that are going to be using our services. we are there for the teams. The purpose is that we are building the things that they need, and that means we need to know what they need. We need to know what we've made is actually working for them. We need feedback from them so we can improve things. We would, of course, really like more time to know how the end users, which is to say the residents of Norway, how things are working for them as well. And again, this is where I think we have some improvement that we can do. So I have a little bit of time where I can also talk a little bit about our accessibility team, which is to say those of us who are specialists in accessibility, how we work to scale out accessibility knowledge in our organization. We've got a pretty big team of accessibility specialists in NOV. I think it's like we count ourselves as 10 total, but there's probably like 5 or 6 core members. But outside of that, we have what's called an ildsjäls network or firebrand network of people who are especially interested in accessibility. So we know that we can rely on these people to stand up for accessibility in their teams. We have regular meetings where people have the opportunity to learn more about the subject. Another thing that we do is we offer courses. Both my colleague Morten and I hold technical and less technical courses for anybody working in NOV IT. So we have courses about semantic HTML and ARIA, courses about screen readers and accessible media. NOV is really good about allowing people to spend energy and time on learning more. And thankfully, our accessibility team is able to help the teams learn more about not just how to fulfill the legal requirements, but also how to give good user experiences. I've also mentioned this about the good practice documentation that Aksel involves. These are really deep dives into particular subjects. For example, this with disabled states, or maybe articles that are about how you can test at different stages in the development cycle. These are really intended to be information that the teams need in order to cover as much as possible about accessibility in their development cycles. We're still working on this. It's a lot of work. We also have this, it's called the Language Help, which is an automated system that one of my colleagues has set up where you can paste in some text and get feedback about whether or not the text is readable at a reasonable level of complexity. Long sentences, kind of trigger words or words that we want to avoid using. And we also have this Test My Product and Test Lab. Test Lab, the way this works is that we have both assistive technology, and it's possible for people to come in with their own assistive technology and check out solutions. We have eye tracking, and we have cameras that show both the screen and the user's face and, for example, eye tracking heat maps. So here it's possible for the teams to observe real users interacting with their solutions. We also have what we call an empathy lab, where people can try different assistive technology, or they can try different sorts of things that simulate different kinds of disabilities. And many have been to our empathy lunches, which are very popular. People basically try on different kinds of either assistive technology, like a wheelchair, or tools that simulate a loss of ability, like headphones here that cover your that make it to where you're not able to hear so well, or we have some gloves that simulate shaking. Now, this is the sort of thing that one can have many opinions on about whether it's kosher to simulate different kinds of ability loss. But what we see is when people participate in these lunches, it's very eye-opening, and they tend to be much better advocate for accessibility. We also use SiteImprove to monitor our open systems. And we work directly with the company to try and improve the results, the way that the algorithms work to test our solutions. So there's really a whole package here that we're using to scale out accessibility in our organization. So as you can see, we can talk about how we work, but we don't have all the answers. However, you are free to ask questions if you have them, and I will do my best to answer.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was really interesting. And I love especially we need to have time to research and explore. I wish all organizations and everyone working in accessibility could say that, because I really think that is sometimes just you run for the next thing and you don't kind of contemplate things. So thank you for that. Many good quotes and good ideas. Even if I did hear you do similar talks before, I still always learn something new. So thank you for that. So we have a couple of questions for you and still trickling in. So the first one is, do you experience pushback from certain teams or roles? If so, how do you argue for the need for accessibility with these people?
Yes. Of course we do. For the most part, I have to say, I'm really impressed with NOV compared to other organizations I've been a part of, because of the fact that the management talks about accessibility all the time. Mostly it's not a question. Mostly you're not going to get pushback. And if you do, it's usually pretty simple to remind people, yes, but the services that we're making have to work for everybody. We try and go more with a carrot versus stick. We don't want to focus on compliance. We don't want to be talking about we could get fines for this. We really want to focus more on that. We want things to be positive for people to use.
Okay, so do you have any statistics about the user satisfaction when it comes to the digital services of NOV?
They exist, but I don't have them.
Okay.
we have a lot of teams that we actually have a team that does research ops. We're very fortunate. People do test this, and we do adjust our solutions based on the feedback that we get. But I don't have any stats on me right now. I'm sorry.
Okay, so that's two different teams doing kind of ordinary user research. And yeah, okay, so interesting. So, so this I think has to do with what you said in the beginning about kind of taking in the assistive technology specialists in your team and so on. So not all organizations may have an assistive technology department, kind of obvious. Do you have any tips for smaller businesses who want to do similar things? So how can we, I think it's kind of the...
Well, one way is that you actually bring people in. You can still do user testing with people who use those technologies natively, even if you don't have them on staff. Another one, of course, would be using a consultancy firm to help you out with the testing with assistive technology. But it's just important that you do it one way or other. And of course, you can learn yourself to use screen readers pretty easily, so you can get some idea of how things are working.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of touched upon this before, but is NOV especially good at universal design, or is this more or less what all Norwegian agencies do? I think you already answered this, but...
Well, I think we do pretty well. But again, we have so many different services that it's very hard to get an idea of exactly where we are status-wise. Things can vary a lot, but for the most part, the fact that management have prioritized this means that we do pretty well.
Yeah. Do you have any statistics on the percentage of visitors who have a disability or an accessibility need from your? That's again, I guess, for the user research. So do you know how many of the visitors visiting your digital services, I guess, who are persons with disabilities or who have accessibility needs?
I don't think so, and not more than what we know about the population in general. I think that also would probably be, I know you can't really get statistics about assistive technology through the web in a straightforward manner. So not that I know of.
No. So I don't know the background, but I was just, when I read the question, I was thinking that at least for some of the services, the percentage would probably be rather high just because of the services you do provide. So I mean, it's kind of obvious that NAV, if anyone should be accessible, it should be NAV.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think
so
it would be pretty bad news if our application for guide dogs was not working with screen readers.
Exactly, yeah. So I got a question from Alberto. What's the impact and benefits in your current position of having been IAAP certified?
Yeah. Oh, I learned so much through the certification process. When I studied for especially the web accessibility specialist certification, you really have to go through the standards and supporting documents in so much detail. So I learn incredibly much, and I really see how it helps when you have so many people in your organization. You're going to get a lot of questions. And really, the certification has helped a lot in being able to provide answers.
So how many NAV is certified? You know, you said 200,000 something staff. So that's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, I think there's like I'm not sure how many are certified. I should have looked that up beforehand.
Okay, but probably not all the 200,000 then. I guess
No.
So what would you say is the major challenge for you to make sure that people with disabilities reach the information they need? I mean, still you're doing all this good thing, but still what's left? What's your biggest challenge to really reach people?
I think there's this whole area of not knowing what we don't know. The subject of digital exclusion is it's very much discussed right now, and we really don't know. There's so many people who have right to our services who just aren't very technical, or maybe they don't have access to a computer. It's not even so much about accessibility, digital accessibility. It's this exclusion that we really don't know much about. But those people have just as much right to our services as people who can use a computer. So that's a big question.
Yeah, but that's really a good way to put it. That's kind of the unknown. That's the biggest challenge I think we all have. But one interesting thing, just for a little bit of marketing, that at Funka we are doing a research project right now in Norway, where NAV is kind of the pilot. So some of the services will also be a little bit worked on from a cognitive standpoint. So that could maybe lead to some new ideas or results. Who knows? So, okay, so that was all the questions we had. Thank you very much for responding to them. I'll just try to share my screen again so that I can do a little bit of marketing of the upcoming webinars. So on the 27th of October, we have a webinar on digital video and accessibility presented by Klaus Sørensen from Mediehuset in Denmark. And on the 17th of November, we have a webinar called Accessibility in Large Organizations, How to Do It, or something like that, which is presented by Anna Stålberg from Handelsbanken, one of the big banks in Sweden. So don't miss out on those. And for those of you who weren't participating in the Web Accessibility Directive second anniversary this last Friday, we are just putting together the recording, so it will be up on the global IAAP website soon. And if you were registered, you will get an email with a link directly to the recording. And for those of you who are not yet members in IAAP, I just wanted to remind you that when you become a member in the Nordic countries, you automatically become a member of the Nordic chapter, which means that you get the global, all the member benefits that anyone gets in the organization at the global level, but you also get an additional kind of bonus benefits from the regional and local webinars and newsletters and meetups and so on that we are doing. And we haven't been doing a lot face-to-face during the last couple of years for obvious reasons, but we are now planning to change that. And with Alberto on board, we will also have much more time to to travel and meet up and also reach out to other conferences. And we just did a planning meeting with our advisory council a week ago or so, when we looked at what other events are there out there where IAAP Nordic could be presented to the world, so that we get even more members on board. So if you have any tips or something, any themes you would like to have in the webinars, or anything you would like to, if you would like to contribute to the newsletter, or if there is an event where you think IAAP could be suitable to present, then do not hesitate to reach out. Alberto has a.highlander@accessibilityassociation.org, his email address, and of course you can find all the Nordic information at www.iaapnordic.org, or at the global organization website as well. And we are currently also working on more translations of the Nordic materials, so that we will have in all 4 Nordic languages that we cover, stepwise reaching out to more people with information in the local languages. So, and with that, I would like to thank Sarah again for this fantastic presentation. Thank you for sharing with us, and thank you also Tiba for all the technical things, setting up, supporting us with this. And I'll let Alberto, I see Alberto is on screen, so he probably wants to say something. So I'll let you finalize this session for today, Alberto.
Yeah, but just basically thank you everybody for your attendance today. You can find my contact information over there or on the IAAP Nordic website. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I'm here for any question or reflection or anything you need. Thank you so much for today.
Okay, thank you everyone. Bye-bye.